I'm Melissa Parrish. I'm the Executive Director of Ad Exchanger Research, and before that, I was a VP at Forrester, where I led a team covering marketing on mobile and emerging channels. That's why I am here, and let's go down the line here and do some introductions so everybody knows who we are.
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Matt Dringler. I'm at Mobex right now. I was an electrical engineer to begin with. Decided I didn't want to do that, went into marketing. I was at Staples for about 2.5 years client side, and now I'm agency side at Mobex, primarily working on helping brands understand mobile from a holistic perspective, as well as being proactive in bringing them solutions to their current media strategies. Thanks.
Great.
I'm Kate O'Loughlin. I'm from TapAd. I manage our media business, and we were chatting backstage about how I'm also an engineer by education and decided to go from doing engineering for the military into marketing. So it's funny to have similar backgrounds. And TapAd is a cross-screen technology company, so we are enabling agencies, marketers, marketing tech companies understand audiences across all screens, deliver media to them, measure them, and take their understanding across everyone's gadgets.
Yeah. And Dustin Odell, Director of Business Development with AdTheorent. I was not an engineer, or never planned to be, but no. And then AdTheorent is a predictive targeting mobile DSP, branching into desktop and trying to understand the correlation between the two and use the data to make smarter decisions.
All right, so I am aware that we are the last thing between you and lunch, so I hope someone will give me a big old, hey, you only have 1 minute left. Thank you. And before we get deeply into this conversation, I thought we should level set, because the title of this session is Delivering High-Yielding ROI with Programmatic. Lots of stuff in there. So let's start with a baseline. Could each of you give me your definition of programmatic?
Sure. So an interesting conversation that happened with the panel up here with Jonah and John, where they talked about context being very important. And I actually think that programmatic is, it steps a little bit away from that context, although with help from folks like Grapeshot, I think that maybe you can start out layering on context. But programmatic in my mind is right person, right message. And that's typically how I like to think about it. And as we start to layer on context, sometimes we start to see some lift in that regard. But for me, it doesn't matter necessarily where the media is being run. It's the right person and it's the right message. And that's how I think about programmatic.
Cool, thank you. Kate?
And I think programmatic is to achieve those things with less humans in the loop and with more data backing it up. So programmatic means connecting publishers and connecting buyers more seamlessly and giving everybody the most data possible to eke out as much ROI as possible.
Excellent.
Yeah, and programmatic, I mean, simply the automation of ad buying. You have programmatic direct, you have RTB environments, so I think all those are kind of subsets of programmatic, but I think really the number one key is just being able to leverage the data. If with data behind it to make an ad relevant, whether it's a native ad, a display ad, it's just being able to layer on that data and make decisions in real time that cause relevancy that will increase, I think, what all brands want, whether it's attention or conversions.
So it's interesting, at Ad Exchanger Research, we say essentially the amalgamation of all three of those definitions. For us, programmatic is buying audiences in a way that is driven by data using automation. Mm-hmm. So it's all of these things, and that's what we want to talk about, how we use data to buy smart media, probably across channels, which is actually my next question, mm-hmm. In an automated and efficient way. So let's talk about channels. We, every year, Ad Exchanger Research does a state of programmatic media study, and we found this year, not surprisingly, that there are multiple channels being bought programmatically, finally, which is really good. But at the moment, they are limited to digital video, display, straight up display, and mobile, both web and app. I'd love to know what you guys are seeing. Are you seeing these channels being bought programmatically? Are our respondents a little bit more tip of the spear? Well, what do you think? What channels are being bought programmatically? Kate, why don't we start with you? Shake things up a little.
Yeah, sure. Yes, I see them being bought programmatically, and I think there is momentum not to think about them being bought in mobile, in video, in display, and think about them more as buying a person wherever they are, regardless of channel. So buying programmatically the right audience, backed by a lot of data, kind of independent of the screen that they're looking at. So that momentum has built over the last few years, and I think this year people really have put money behind it. At TapAd, we've been kind of thinking about this idea for almost 5 years, or 5+ years, and it was always kind of intuition that you should be able to buy a person regardless of their screen, and then this year really it was like not an innovation thing anymore, and now it's kind of like table stakes. So I am seeing programmatic across channels, but more importantly programmatic to buying a consumer.
One of my biggest issues though with that general idea is that we have a hard time creating like an actual maximum frequency, because we have a hard time identifying these people across these different channels, and working with the only partners that do that means we have a very small subset of people to work with, and it means that we can't diversify the people that we're working with. We can't necessarily bring in new solutions to our clients, and it's one of the biggest, I would say, white spaces within the gap or within the programmatic space right now. So we cannot do a decent job of connecting the dots between all the different screens.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I hear you, because we provide analytics about the media they're running or the data that we have, but it doesn't get you the answer of like, what was my actual frequency? What was my actual reach? And so to get there, folks like you need to put more pressure on to the big guys to kind of open those walled gardens so that we can, thank you, we appreciate it, so that we can do measurement, we can do actual reach and frequency across all channels and all people.
Yeah, no, what I was going to say, I think, to your point about buying audiences is one thing, and I think that's great. And then I think there's these things too, and I think I've talked to Dan about this, but like these, micro moments or mobile moments, like the audience could be great, but we have to use data to understand that maybe that right time or that right day. And then, to your comments about all the different channels, there's a huge lack of tracking and attribution. Like, how do I know that a user that saw a social ad is the one that I need to serve the ad to right now at this moment on my mobile site? Yeah. Or like, all the examples that YieldMo had, those are all great, but they're happening in one silo, right? They're not taking into account that a user saw an email or a social ad. And I'm not saying that's easy, but you have to start to look at it, otherwise we're going to miss the kind of the whole overall point.
Yeah, so I want to dig into this point a little bit more. I thought we might warm up a little bit, but let's do it. Let's just jump right in. So here's the interesting thing about cross-device identification, attribution, all those things. It is much more complex than just sometimes you have a cookie and sometimes you don't. Yeah. You have providers like TapAd who are creating cross-device identity, which is incredibly important. Where I think it gets really complex is that the person, the actual advertiser, in some cases, this whole environment is incredibly opaque to them, because their media agency uses technology to buy programmatically. Sometimes the agency has a partnership directly with a TapAd or one of your competitors. Mm-hmm. Or there is a partnership to provide that cross-device identity within other technology platforms that the agencies are using, like a demand-side platform. Mm-hmm. Sometimes those same partnerships exist within the data management platform that the advertiser is using, and it's very hard to know how many levels of partnerships there are in this ecosystem. So the question that I have, I speak to marketers about this all the time. Yeah. And if you speak to marketers, what they want is total transparency all the time, or so they think, because when I have actually been able to sit down with some of them and their media buying partners and show them this is the complexity we're talking about, they're like, oh yeah, maybe I actually
don't want transparency. No, we don't want it.
Right. So
take it away.
So that's my question to each of you. To what level of detail does the person holding the purse strings need to know about this complexity? What does everyone in this room need to encourage the advertiser to understand about this ecosystem of devices and targeting? Do you want to start?
I think everything begins with the education of the advertiser themselves. I've worked with clients that know this much about digital advertising. I've worked with clients, and I even worked at Staples, where they know this much about digital advertising. It's all dependent on how much they're willing to take in, first and foremost, but even to talk more directly about the agency side of things and the lack of transparency, right? So if they're knowledgeable, I'll talk about it. If they're not knowledgeable, then they have to trust us enough to say, your objective, your overall business objective is X, And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find the people that can derive the metrics that achieve X.
And so when you are talking with someone who is knowledgeable and you have those conversations, to what level of detail do you go? What kind of information do you give them?
It's about, we talked about deterministic and probabilistic identification, right? So like talking about the different ways that people do that, things like blacklisting IPs because they're at a Starbucks, so we can't tie them together necessarily because they're at a Starbucks. Like, you can start talking about some of the smaller niche things and how they do it. And in my mind, it's not actionable, right? So understanding how the technology works is probably more of like a warm fuzzy than something that will allow them to actually do something with that. And so I go as deep as they want, I guess to answer your question more directly, as deep as they want. But I kind of stop until we start to talk more about what they're trying to achieve.
Interesting. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I would love your perspective,
Yeah.
Kate, because you guys
Yeah.
are. I have actually said this to the team at TapAd, and I don't think it's any secret that actually almost every single programmatic ad technology partner that we talk with or that we at Ad Exchanger Research get briefed by, they go, "Oh, we're really excited we have a partnership with TapAd." It's like, well, that makes you unique.
Yeah.
So you guys are clearly a deeply embedded part of the ecosystem. How many times do you talk to the advertiser? Do your agency partners bring you into those conversations?
They do, because they really want the brand to understand how their data that they've worked and really invested in is going to be amplified or affected.
Yeah.
Right? Deanie Elsner,
Sure, yeah.
who was the ex-CMO of Kraft, she spoke at one of our conferences earlier, or late spring, and she was talking about how she made this big investment in understanding how good was all of this third-party data, or how good was her own data. And she realized that what they knew and what they collect on their own properties or about their own consumers, offline or online, was the truth. And that all the stuff that was added onto it kind of like blurred it and made it worse and worse. So what we've found is that we get involved with the brands so that they know when you start layering in cross-device identity, how that amplifies that huge investment or that huge belief that they have in their own good data and what's going to affect there. So yes, we do get brought into with the brands. We do get brought in at the holding level, at the agency holding company level too, because they know that they have so many pieces of technology that identity is often the thing that's going to hold it all together. And it is a complex conversation. Does TapAd make most sense with the DMP? Does it make most sense with your DSP? How is this all going to hold together? So we have a very wide, and sometimes as Matt's saying, we just get the trust conversation. You're not quite there yet. Just trust us. This is the right way to go.
Yeah, very cool. Well, what do you think?
Yeah, so one thing that I think at AdTheorent that we've done really well is we take a very education-first approach, which sometimes can be tougher because then they're like, okay, so what's going on now? But we do find that when we get in there, and we keep, by brands direct, we're getting a lot of people asking us to come in and talk about the ecosystem. So we kind of take our AdTheorent hat off and say, let's just teach you how these things actually work.
Yeah.
And I think there's two faults. One, the brands, what we find in the majority is a lot of them don't take the necessary time to really understand what's going on, and so they just kind of, all right, you handle it, and they ask the wrong questions. Like, the next time I want, people keep telling us, hey, the CTR, focus on this CTR, and we're like, why? Why are you asking that question? They don't know why they're asking.
Yeah.
And then it's also our fault as an ad tech industry because everything's a black box. Everybody can do everything, so we don't make it easy for them to understand, and I think that's where we're trying to go in and say, let's just take off the ad there and let's show them first what is actually happening. Then they do start to realize, and I think the cream rises to the top in terms of which partners actually execute that and which are kind of hiding behind that smoke screen of what appears to be a real piece of technology.
Yeah.
I actually really respect what AdTheorent does because they do walk in and they start to do a lot of really great educational sessions, like as much of a deep dive as how does an image appear on a page, right? And once you start to understand stuff like that, I think what happens is you get more knowledgeable people within the industry. You also remove that black box and you start creating more products, because as more people understand how the industry or how the ecosystem works, you can start achieving your goals with new ideas. And it's like teaching the people at the bottom how to do stuff, and then they're gonna like totally rise up above everything else and create shit we've never seen before. Pardon my expression.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more. We'll stay on this cross-device thing. For those of you who read Ad Exchanger programmatic.com, you've probably seen us publish our definitions of multi-channel versus cross-channel, which I actually think is really important. We say that multi-channel is when you use lots of channels to broadcast the same or nearly the same message. And cross-channel is when you know the differences between and among the channels, how your customers use them across the customer life cycle, and then sequence your messaging to help move them through that life cycle or funnel. It sounds like, based on the rest of the content this morning too, I think we might all be in agreement that, especially when it comes to mobile as part of a multi-device world, we are still more in a multi-channel mindset for programmatic than a cross-channel mindset. Is that fair? Why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I think it is fair, and I think that's very true. And I think it was funny. I think Yieldmo, which I love, their creative formats are fantastic. And you saw the purchase intent, the whole funnel.
Exactly.
What's funny is if you look at sequential message and only mobile, you're missing potentially all these other exposures that happen prior or after. And so with maybe the awareness and the intent happened in social or email, and then so therefore the ad that you show on mobile at that given time on that content needs to reflect that. And I don't think that's happening enough, or if at all. And again, it's not an easy thing to accomplish, but the thought process needs to be that. Like, what's the entire exposure string of this user, not just what happens in mobile, okay, cool, what happens in desktop, all right.
Yeah.
And getting to that level.
So let's take that one step further for the technologists and service providers in the room. To what degree is the burden on us as vendors and service providers to make sure that we play nicely with the rest of the value chain to make cross-device special? I say this because actually backstage we were talking about how cross-channel, cross-device is the future. We're all just going to have to get better at this. But right now, specialist vendors and service providers are crucial because there are so many important things about each unique channel that we have to explore. But to what degree is the burden on us to play nice with the rest of the ecosystem to make this work more seamlessly from a data and attribution perspective?
To be honest with you,
Not us.
Well, I don't want to say not us. It will be
Yeah.
it will be a burden on us
Totally.
once clients and once advertisers start asking for it and once they start understanding it.
Yeah.
And I do think it's the right way from just a holistic marketing perspective to make sure that you're looking at all of your media mix, right? I also think that advertisers believe that it should go that way too, but it's so complex that they don't really know how to ask the right questions to make it happen.
Yeah.
So now that I'm saying it, maybe I'm convincing myself that the burden is more on us than it is on the advertisers. But all that being said, I think it just starts with education. It starts with education once everybody understands, or at least starts to embrace how consumers research products and how they actually take into consideration your brand. True innovation. That's when it'll begin.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say that the burden is on us to provide the proof too. So we can give the technology and just kind of say that it works, but also to quantify, like, what is the lift if you talk to someone sequentially across multiple screens, or what is the lift if you show them an ad here and an ad here versus just an ad here. And it's also the burden on us to not just stop at digital, but also to keep educating and say that you're really talking about a person. So let's start talking TV now too. Let's start talking about out of home, and let's start getting ahead of consumers when it comes to wearables and the Internet of Things, because we fell behind when it came to mobile. So it's burdens on us to start getting ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's on us to execute. I think it has to start first with education, but then the brands. I mean, how many times we can come and try to do X, Y, and Z for you. We've proven how we can do it, and we'll say, hey, we'll need to have access to this, this, and this. Sorry, can't pixel that. Sorry, can't put the SDK in here. And it's like, well, how do you expect a full solution if you're not going to allow, open access to the data that needs to be collected to even execute anything? And I get to it, and I think there's a couple brands, a couple agencies doing it where they say, here's my problem. And then they start to handpick certain vendors to actually solve that problem. And they say, here's the amount of money that I'm putting towards it. We're going to equally split it up, so that way there's no fighting of, well, Ad There can do this and Tap Ad can do that. We can all do our own. We all have pros and cons, right? And just saying, get that out of the way. Let's combine these people to work towards a goal that's actually going to provide a real solution for the advertisers instead of everyone fighting over something and not getting any real access.
Completely agreed, right? Like it's also it's so important to understand, like, whoever everybody here meets with within, let's say, a brand, you're probably not meeting with all of the right people. I can't tell you the number of times that I've set up a meeting when I was at Staples, for instance, okay? And I actually had a partner come in, and I brought another side of the building over. And it was the first time I met them. We worked for the same damn company. Like, this happens all the time. And so I think the companies that are going to start doing this whole cross-channel attribution and being able to buy everything programmatically, or however you want to do it, are going to be successful when they realize that, yes, your in is probably the digital marketing department, but that's not everything. You have to talk to operations, you have to talk to e-commerce, you have to probably talk at the C-level so that shit can start trickling down. Yeah. Like, it's all about knocking down those silos, which, Jesus Christ, everybody says this, right? Everybody says you have to knock down silos. You actually have to do it. Yeah. And it's something that I will give credit to all of the partners that I worked with while I was at Staples that actually started to happen. And so it's on us in the room to do it.
Yeah.
In my
and
mind.
we have that exact same thing with brands. We're like, I go, how does your TV affect your mobile engagement? Oh, TV's a different team. I'm like, what about your CRM data? Oh, that's a different team too. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. No wonder you can't solve cross-channel, right? Like, the way you operate as a brand doesn't even allow for it. So you're asking the wrong questions already.
Yeah, and then the poor analytics guys that are locked somewhere down in the dungeon, and you're like, well, don't forget about them.
No, right?
Which is why it results to CTR. Yeah. It's like, oh, we got a 2% CTR, but what does that mean? That isn't even, did that result in more sales? We don't know, because we can't pixel anything.
It's an interesting cultural clash, because on the one hand, the largest advertisers are more entrenched. They have more entrenched partners, they have more entrenched silos. It is going to take them longer to pivot, it just is. And then you've got advertising technologists who are small and nimble and young and excited and don't deal with all that stuff. So I actually think, speaking of on whom the burden is, I think it's actually on both sides to realize that when we're not speaking the same language.
Yeah.
Let's turn to data. As we're getting ready to wrap up, because we are supposed to be talking about the data component here. Right. So let's tackle this as perhaps the last question. Is more data, whether it's data to build audience profiles or to measure, is more data always better? Why don't we start with you?
I'll start. It can eventually be. I think until a client understands or a brand understands their own data, they shouldn't go out grasping for all this third-party data. If you don't know how your customers interact with you right now and your CRM data and your first-party data, going and grabbing a whole bunch of extra third-party data segments is not going to matter. I think once you build the foundation, then sure, layering it on intelligently can result in, again, with processes that can kind of consume all that data and make predictive decisions and intelligent decisions, then yes, the more data could eventually be better, but not always.
All right. Kate?
Maybe. I think that you have to not just look at it in terms of how many pings or how many points you have in your database, but you have to look at quality, to look at price, and you have to look at activationability about it too. And then you can understand how much data you can actually stand to understand within your organization.
All right. And the last word.
I guess I'll be, and I realize that I'm like standing between you guys and lunch right now, so I'll make it quick. So more data is a good thing, but it is not the order winner, it is the order qualifier. There's a reason why right now in this country, I would say in the world, that programmers and data scientists are the two most sought after majors right now. And that's because it's not the amount of data that you have that makes you a winner, it's what you do with that data. Mm-hmm. And so it's the folks that are going to start to be able to figure out what data is the right data to collect that is actually actionable and useful. Those are going to be the guys that win, in my mind. And it's going to take some really smart people who are right now probably still in college in their parents' basement programming apps to take over your location, I'm sure.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks very much.